the brain can change, that we can develop new pathways, new ways of communicating, new ways of responding. What we also realized, and we've known this, is that very primitive parts of our brain is our amygdala area, which is our anxiety center, and it's designed to keep us safe, often triggers uncomfortable emotions based on how we think about things, because the amygdala can't see reality. So it takes its cues from how we think. And if we're worried about something, it doesn't know if we're worried about being late for work, failing a test, getting a conflict, or there's a tiger chasing us. So the more that happens, the more we worry about something, the more anxiety and uncomfortable we feel, and the more likely we are to operate on our emotional brain. Another piece is, I'll have people saying, I just can't stop worrying. How do I stop worrying? Well, I think one thing people need to recognize is our dopamine receptors in our brain, our pleasure centers, are activated when we worry. Doesn't mean it feels good to worry. Doesn't mean it feels good at all to worry. And we believe it's an old adaptive response because then it keeps us focused on worry. So between our primitive brain, our anxiety brain that wants to keep us safe, so it's going to trigger that body to feel uncomfortable emotions. If the smart brain's worrying, plus those dopamine, those pleasure centers, that's how people can often get stuck.
Welcome to Onward Live, a live stream focused on encouraging you to create a life you love living now. Let's go beyond success to significance. Being clear on our why is crucial. It requires doing the inner work, finding ourselves, getting to know ourselves, embracing our inner child, shedding social conditioning, and letting go of perfect. We know obstacles make us stronger. We can dream big and take action. Believe you can, and you're halfway there. I invite you to tune in every week and engage with me and my inspiring guests. Invite your friends. Let's make time for what matters most in our lives. Let's move onward together. Hello for people that are watching tonight, and to the people that listen to this as a podcast when I publish it later as a podcast. If you're watching, let me know you can hear me. Sometimes I've had mic issues, but I think we're good today. I was just talking with Dr. Nancy Stella earlier before we came live, and she just had a bad storm. We had a terrible storm too. The power went out, and I thought, at least it's not going to happen during the podcast. I think the storm is gone, but I'm so excited to bring my guest on tonight. Dr. Nancy Stella has been a leading clinical psychologist in the Cincinnati area for over 20 years. And after a shattering divorce, Dr. Stella found traditional therapeutic approaches wanting. So what did she do? She went out and figured it out on her own. She developed the Courageous Brain Process, which is an innovative science-based method of therapy. And it's rooted in the most up-to-date neuroscience. And her approach has allowed countless clients to experience their own transformations from the inside out by bypassing the shortcomings of traditional talk therapy to repattern the way their brains process fear. And she also wrote a book about it. So I'm really excited to bring Nancy Stella on. And hi, Nancy.
Hi, Emily. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, awesome. I guess I could have had a doctor in front of your name, and it probably should say fine. D squared, because you've got 2 doctorates.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that was a moment of insanity. So.
One in social psychology and one in clinical psychology. That's amazing. Yeah. So welcome to the show tonight.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. I can't tell if people, tonight's been it's been interesting in the summer. I think people viewing these lives in the summer has gone down a little bit, but then people are listening to the audio version of the podcast when I publish it. So you never know if people are going to be here tonight or not. But if you are here watching, feel free to ask me and my guest, Nancy, some questions, and feel free to, just let us know where you're tuning in from. So I'd love to let us know that you're here. I can see one person at least is watching, and there could be more. So I'm interested in talking to you about fear, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your story. Wait, someone posted, so I want to make sure they can hear us. Oh, hi, Gabe. Thanks for joining. I'd like to hear your story, and then I'd also like to hear
what your definition of fear is, and how do we know if it's fear or like something else that's driving us, and how do we know if I know I'm asking a ton of questions, but like, how do we know if we're really stuck in its fear, if it's just the way it is?
Okay, good questions. Tough questions, but good questions. Let me start with my story because that's how the whole concept kind of evolved from. I had been a practicing psychologist for a number of years, and I ended up going through a very difficult a divorce I did not want, a divorce I did not expect. And what I found was that I was reacting in a way that was not healthy for me. It certainly was not a way to win my husband back, but I couldn't figure out why I was reacting the way that I was. And I was reacting, crying, needy, clingy. And I knew that wouldn't win him back. So I was trying to figure out what's going on that's making me react this way. And what I realized is that I was being thrown back to a previous event in my life that was traumatic for me. And that was my father had died when I was shortly before I turned 5. And at that time, my family somewhat fell apart. My family were Italian immigrants. My mother ended up in and out of psychiatric hospitals at the time. And I was living with a grandmother who didn't speak English well. And I became just a little neurotic mess, 5 years old. I became clingy, needy, whiny. And that's appropriate for a 5-year-old, but it wasn't
Yes.
appropriate for me when I was in my 40s. But I couldn't stop it. And I said, what in the world is kind of happening to me? And why am I having difficulty kind of stopping this reaction? And what I realized was that in the process of being thrown back, and this is somewhat of a tricky concept, is that chronologically we're one age. So I was an adult woman, but I was taken back to being 5 when that trauma first occurred. And what I was doing, I was problem solving like a 5-year-old. And
Mm-hmm.
I realized I was reacting like I was being abandoned. I didn't think I would be able to, I felt like a little girl. I was afraid I wouldn't survive. Even though I was successful financially and competent personally, I felt like I was 5 years old. I remember sitting with my kids and thinking, ooh, we got 3 kids here, me and my 2 daughters. So I thought something's going on. I went to therapy and and I got some relief, but there was no sustainable change. And I realized that happened with my clients too. Although my client may have felt better, it seems like there wasn't permanent change. So I kind of trying to figure out what's happening here.
So let me
So I
ask you
looked,
a question.
okay.
Why did you go to therapy? Because you're a therapist.
Because I'm a human too. And we can't, it's like, they say physicians can't heal themselves, psychologists can't heal themselves
Mhm.
either, but I figured out how to, I should say.
Okay.
Okay. So I went to therapy. It really wasn't successful in terms of any kind of long-term change. It didn't change my fears. And what I realized was looking in the neuroscience literature is that, we have, and I won't get all science wonky on you,
Hmm.
we have neural pathways in our brains, and those are simply like our communication networks. It's how our brain kind of talks to ourself and talks to itself. And I realized that when a trauma occurs, or it doesn't even have to be a trauma, it can just be events that kind of pile up for people, that they develop habitual ways of responding, and it almost it becomes automatic. And if it's an unhealthy way of responding, it can lay dormant for years, like it did for me, until it was triggered. So I realized I had to begin changing. I had basically learned how, in some ways, to kind of reparent myself, but learn how to bring myself into adulthood. And that's how this model developed. And you had asked the question, fear. How do we know it's fear? How do we know it's not something else? Fear is the root of our issue. Fear is the cause of anxiety. Fear is the cause of depression. So when people think about it, really, they're afraid of what's going to happen.
Got
If
it.
I'm anxious, I'm afraid of the unknown. I'm afraid of uncertainty.
So
Similar with
so
depression.
Gabe says trauma that deeply ingrained can still surface. Yes, Gabe, it can. And that's amazing and scary at the same time. Can I mind if I share an example of how I witnessed it
No,
too?
please,
I,
absolutely.
I've witnessed it in myself, but I'll just share this example. Like, I got upset with my dad over something, and we got into a little disagreement. And later on, we resolved it. But later on, he emailed me and said that he doesn't like it when people don't get along. He gets scared. You know, it reminds him of his childhood. So I went and talked to him about that. And what he said was he remembers his dad and his uncle arguing and how he felt. And I kind of was trying to explain to him, he's 88, but that in that moment, I was really talking to, I don't know, 8 or 9-year-old Joe, my dad, who's 8 or 9, not 88-year-old Joe. It was the 8 or 9-year-old.
Right.
Right.
That's a great example. Yes. And even, you know, and that may not have been a traumatic event for him, but it's the kind of event that gets piled one on top of the other. And it forms those pathways. It's much like, let's say I'm in a meadow and I want to walk from point A to point B. The first time I walk that path, you can hardly tell I walked it. But the more I do it, the more that path becomes pronounced. That's what happens in our brain. And when trauma happens, it's more like a truck just driving through and it forms a path right away. So, and sometimes back and forth for some people who've experienced significant trauma. So it's, you know, and what happens is when we get thrown back to an earlier age, we problem solve from that developmental perspective. So I was problem solving like a 5-year-old and it wasn't working. Your father was problem solving like an 8 or 9-year-old, which may have been just to withdraw or freeze, and it doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
To say, please stop it, because I'd feel uncomfortable. So,
right.
So how do you heal that 5-year-old Nancy or that 8 or 9-year-old? I call my dad Joe. He's my real dad. But how do you heal that? And you have to kind of integrate that person back into you, right?
Yes. And, you know, some wounds and some wounds don't get completely healed, but what you can do is learn to recognize them. And that when you're poked or when you're stirred, being able to respond appropriately, more adult-like. When I work with clients, and when I did this with myself, the first thing I did was tell my story, you know, and I ask clients to tell their story. Our memory isn't always the best. That doesn't matter. What's important is how the person perceives it and what their story is. And when they tell their story, I look for and begin helping them identify what their triggers are. And people know they're triggered on several different levels. One way people know they're triggered is when their reaction is out of proportion to the event. So if you react and it's bigger than what's happening, what's going on is that's that old stuff. Something else is coming forward. Or if, you know, I start thinking kind of all or none, or that black or white, or, you know, there's several different kinds of triggers, but typically there's an emotional response and your thinking becomes very concrete and it can actually be distorted. Okay, so we begin identifying what the triggers are. And then when somebody is triggered, how do they begin self-sabotaging? So like in your father's case, if he doesn't like conflict, you know, just telling somebody to stop it doesn't work. Or in my case, becoming clingy, needy, and whiny was self-sabotaging. So it's beginning to recognize when we begin self-sabotaging.
Or avoiding conflict and maybe not be able to have a healthy conflict.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
I've never seen my parents argue. That's not healthy.
No, it's not. No, because we have disagreements with people. No, so it doesn't mean you're going to have a knockdown, drag out fight, or you have to scream and yell at each other, but where there's conflict. And most people that I encounter are conflict avoidant. There's a few people that are okay with conflict, but most people are conflict avoidant because it makes them feel just incredibly uncomfortable and that there's going to be a rupture in the relationship. And then if it's ruptured, then you have to deal with it.
So what did it take therapy for you to remember that 5-year-old Nancy? Or how does somebody who's not a therapist figure this out?
Well, I just do describe it in my book, but the first part really is, I'm going to go back. You need to really tell your story. Tell it to yourself. Write it down. Go through your stories. Look for points in your life where there may have been some type of, I'm going to use the word rupture again, some type of rupture or some kind of either repeated events or a rupture that may have triggered kind of an unhealthy reaction. In other words, it's looking for, where did I get stuck?
Yeah.
Where am I stuck?
Where are you stuck? And maybe even also some like, what are some repeating patterns in my life?
Absolutely. Yeah. Dysfunctional repeating
Yeah.
patterns. Absolutely. And it's looking at what's not working for you. Really, most of us want to have a happy life.
Right.
And it's looking what's not working and then telling your story and kind of figuring out, is there anything from my past that would make this difficult to work through my current life?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
Definitely.
and when I meet with clients, I spend time with them, getting to know them and listening to what they tell me, listening to what patterns they begin repeating. We start from wherever they feel comfortable starting, and then if we have to go back, we go back, and taking them through, you know, where have they had a problem? Or where have they had repeated problems? Why can't I make friends? Why am I shy? Why am I afraid, to drive on the highway? Why am I, and you fill in the blank. And
One place to
eventually,
start is middle school. I've had some clients that are like, middle school, I got picked on, so I want people to like me. And that kind of can, continue in
yeah,
life.
oh, absolutely. I mean, how many of us have gone to an event where all of a sudden, we're worried about how I look. I worry if people are going to talk to me. And I feel like I'm like 13 again. And if you feel like you're 13, you're going to problem solve like 13-year-olds. You may not stomp your feet and slam doors, but you'll probably solve from that developmental perspective. And it just doesn't work when you're in adulthood. And so we look for those patterns where people may just continue to repeat, negative ways of responding, or they're operating just on emotions. When we get upset, this is not literal, but it's almost like our emotional mind gets disconnected from our our logical and rational mind. And the more upset we are, the more we operate on emotions.
So when I know that we've come a long way in neuroscience, when did all this kind of start? I mean, and what has something like grown exponentially over the past several years with what we know
Oh,
about the brain?
a- yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was first in graduate school many years ago, we used to think once a brain was formed, it was formed,
Hmm.
period. It was like concrete. We began learning that it wasn't, that the brain can change, that we can develop new pathways, new ways of communicating, new ways of responding. What we also realized, and we've known this, is that very primitive parts of our brain is our amygdala area, which is our anxiety center, and it's designed to keep us safe, often triggers uncomfortable emotions based on how we think about things, because the amygdala can't see reality. So it takes its cues from how we think. And if we're worried about something, it doesn't know if we're worried about being late for work, failing a test, getting a conflict, or there's a tiger chasing us. So the more that happens, the more we worry about something, the more anxiety and uncomfortable we feel, and the more likely we are to operate on our emotional brain. Another piece is when I'll have people saying, I just can't stop worrying. How do I stop worrying? Well, I think one thing people need to recognize is our dopamine receptors in our brain, our pleasure centers, are activated when we worry. Doesn't mean it feels good to worry. Doesn't mean it feels good at all to worry. And we believe it's an old adaptive response because then it keeps us focused on worry. So between our
Interesting.
primitive brain, our anxiety brain that wants to keep us safe, so it's going to trigger that body to feel uncomfortable emotions. If the smart brain's worrying, plus those dopamine, those pleasure centers, that's how people can often get stuck.
Do you think that and I hear thunder, hopefully we're going to be okay here, but do you think that as we start to learn and create these new neural pathways in our brain, and I know people have been talking about, we still have that reptilian brain that's fight or
Yeah.
flight and all that. Do you think we're going to evolve and not have that anymore? Like, is our brain going to evolve?
I would like to say yes. It's certainly not going to happen in any of our
Yeah.
lifetime. Yeah. So, again, I'd like to say yes. Those reptilian brain, it's been along for a long time, and it really is designed to keep us safe. It's just in today's world, we don't always need it activated as much as it gets activated.
So here's a question. I don't know if this has to do with fear or not. I think it does, but I can't trace it back to something. that I can remember. But when I went to the Naval Academy, in order to graduate, we had to jump off the 10-meter diving tower. Now, most people, they've started moving that to your freshman year, so they know right away if someone can jump or not. I think we did it my junior year, I want to say. And I missed when the class did it because I had had knee surgery. So it might have even been my senior year. Yeah. Or could whatever year it was. I missed doing it with my class. So the difference about doing it with your class is there's a long line of people behind you and they're waiting for you to jump. So I would like to think that if I was doing it with my class, the peer pressure would have gotten me to jump. But I didn't. I had to go up there by myself to jump. And imagine that, you're in the pool, but so I can see all the way down to the bottom of the pool and I can see the roof right there. So I was terrified. It took me several weeks to jump. My people would play that song by Van Halen, Jump. And people tell you to jump. Okay, but that's not helping my friggin' brain to make me jump. So I don't know what it was, but one day I just jumped. And then I went back and jumped 8 times in a row.
Good for you.
But I'm wondering, is fear of heights or fear or claustrophobia, is that something that just is like you inherit, or is that something that is part of how we could change it with our brain, like what you're talking about?
Yeah, I do treat anxiety disorders, and the common and phobias. The common thing that seems to run through some of the phobias, like fear of heights, is again, I'm going to go back to that primitive brain. It's not natural to be 10 meters high and want to jump off. It's not natural to be in an airplane. It's not natural to be on a highway, on a bridge. It's not, things that just, if you look back to cave person times, just isn't natural. And so we do believe that anxiety disorders do have a genetic component. So what we end up seeing is a range for people. There's some people who are risk takers, that physical adventure, and they get highs off that. It doesn't mean that they're not afraid.
Yeah.
It's just that they're willing to face it. And typically, once you face something, what happens is your brain goes, it's not so bad.
Hence, I jumped 8 times in a row one day.
Yes. And that helps that. And then the brain goes, oh, okay. So, she's not dying. So it's okay for her to keep jumping. Now, if you waited until the fear was, if you didn't jump again, your brain doesn't quite completely say, ooh, she survived that time. Could she survive another time?
Yeah. I don't know that I could go back and do it again, but
yes,
I'm just thinking like maybe they could have done something to help us jump instead of just go jump and told us to jump, because it's more than that.
They could have. They really can't. It's and typically when we work with people who have those kinds of fears, we develop a hierarchy. Let's start from the bottom where it's, let's maybe just have you jump, 3 meters.
We did that. Someone even tried to push me off the 7 meter.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. But I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But start lower. And then once your body gets used to that and your brain gets used to that, you just kind of inch up. It's like somebody who has a fear of driving. Let's say we're not going to put them on, 80 mile per hour highway to start driving. We start small.
Yeah.
And once once they're comfortable, then we ratchet it up.
So tell us some stories of, if you can, of like some aha moments that some of your clients had, or how you've helped some of your clients. I don't know if you can or not.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you kind of a composite.
Yeah.
But I think this composite is pretty true anyway for lots of people. There are people who if they grew up with, let's say, a non-nurturing father, somebody who was kind of, you think of very military, cut and dry, not a lot of praise, may have been criticism, not much emotional involvement in someone's life. What can happen is then a male can grow up, or a female can grow up, and really have a strong sense when they have children of obligation. They want to be different than their parent. So what they may do then is swing the opposite way, and and I don't want to say enable their children, but don't let their children see any of their vulnerabilities. And then as they get older, having shame around if they have to ask their children for help, and their children aren't used to asking for help. I'm not sure if that example makes sense at all.
No, it does. It does.
But yeah, and so that can often happen for people. And then it's helping them say, all right, how do we get more balance in life? So, one, you don't ask your children for help. You're going into surgery and you're going with a friend instead of asking one of your 45-year-old children to take you. Helping them realize that they're also robbing their child of their opportunity to help. And they're making the decision for their child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good example. So tell us a little bit about your book. I'm going to put the title of it up here again. Go ahead.
What the book goes through, it's a self-help book. It's, I designed it using the process that I did for myself. And what I did was I picked kind of some of the most common fears that people have. And I give a composite example of a client at the beginning and kind of what they struggle with, and then how we kind of work through that process with them to help them come with some resolution.
Yeah.
The book starts with very primitive, like abandonment, moves up to rejection, and then moves to more sophisticated things like conflict avoidance, like fear of the unknown. So it starts with very basic kind of emotions and then covers some of the more complicated or more sophisticated issues we may struggle with. The book is pretty self-descriptive. It involves not only the stories and how to look at how to identify self-sabotage, how to identify your triggers, and how to begin to develop that courageous brain. So, how can you tolerate your vulnerability and recognize that when you face your vulnerability, your strength emerges. And it also helps kind of validate some of what you feel. And I'll give you an example, and I'm allowed to say this because this is from a fellow psychologist of mine. She had, when she was growing up, her parents were from England, and she was very proud of that. And when she was in elementary school, she would, continue. She mentioned that a lot. And then one day, a good friend of hers turned to her and said something to the effect of, we know your parents are from England. Would you just stop talking about that? And boy, that cut her to her core, because that was something, when she was in third grade, she was really proud of. Yeah. It helped make her feel different, kind of unique. So she ended up then being amazingly through the rest of her life, was very self-conscious about focusing on herself or mentioning something that would make her feel different or be looked at as being different. So we went through this process, and now it helps her take pride in who she is. Doesn't mean she brags about her parents being from England anymore, but she is able to kind of work through it, embrace what she does well, validate herself for that, and kind of can distance herself from those old fears.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I probably should get the book for my daughter, because I'm thinking, she's 26, but when she was younger, 4.5, her parents, I got divorced from her dad. Then we had the sniper. Do you remember the sniper in DC?
Oh, yes.
And so her class we lived in Southern Maryland, but still she wasn't able to go outside for recess. Yes. Everyone was looking for a white truck with a ladder or something. I don't know. Then 9/11 happened, So all these things. And she allows me to say this, then at 15 and a half, she was raped. So all these things have contributed clearly to fear in her. She's come a really long way. I'm so proud of her and how she's worked through it. But it doesn't have to be somebody being mean to you. Like probably this kid that was at the parade, that 2-year-old who's both of his parents.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
how do you deal with, what could somebody do? Like if they see a young child going through some kind of traumatic event like that, how can you help him deal with it now?
Right. That's, we're talking about a 2-year-old who lost both his parents. So he's naturally going to suffer that loss, that grief, and not understand. He's not going to understand the concept of death, but he's certainly going to understand that eventually his parents aren't coming back.
Yeah.
And, we know that memories, it's hard really before the age of 4 to have memories, how clear memories. However, our body holds them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that he won't be triggered later on. And my guess is people will tell him this story. And in the process of telling this story, it's going to become part of who he is. So I'm going to go back to kind of the case of with your daughter and like the DC sniper or 9/11. People were scared. I remember that. I remember being in Maryland when the sniper was going on, and it was kind of eerie to go out because you wouldn't know who was around the corner. Part of it is to begin recognizing that, especially as children, we begin to incorporating these things into our belief system, that the world then is safe. I'm not safe. I'm not safe. So how do I keep myself safe? And for some people, it's like, well, I'll just stay in the house and then I won't go out again. And that's not a healthy way of functioning. So it's helping somebody kind of recognize this trauma, accept the trauma. And like for your daughter, her trauma happened, it wasn't like walking a path. It was that truck going through multiple times.
Right.
Is learning how do I understand where I was when these traumas happen, and be able to, how do I then kind of reframe it for myself and look at it more from an adult or developmentally appropriate perspective, while keeping in mind, am I repeating or having any negative behaviors as a result of this trauma?
Yeah.
Yep. And then, okay, so what am I doing that is robbing me of living my life because of things that happened in the past?
Yeah.
Because I'm afraid of what may happen in the future. And so that's how we begin the process of facing fears. And particularly with trauma, it's so important for a person to be able to tell their story. Just tell their story. My daughter is also a therapist, and she works with children who've had significant trauma. And oftentimes they tell their story, and it's not exact because, somebody could be a superhero in the story.
Right.
But helping turn people into how can you feel, even if it's an illusion, more in control.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one other thing that comes to mind, I didn't really think of it in this context, but is when my daughter's dad passed away in December 2019. And from around this time that year, 2019 until December, she took care of him, and he was really sick with cancer. Like he was paralyzed in both arms. It was just so I think I helped her this weekend because she's thinking about remembering him and feeling bad about how sick he was, and she didn't like seeing him die, just feeling so sick and in pain, and he never complained. And I tried to help her think of it from another perspective. Like, Anna, if you passed away after 5 months of being sick, how would you want people to remember you? Mm-hmm. Would you want people to remember you for those last 5 months, or for how you lived your life? And then I started listing all the ways that she is such an awesome daughter with a big heart and all the things. So, maybe you said like the part of your brain that kind of gets excited about worry, it gets stimulated, right? And so you keep focusing on that.
Yes.
So I'm thinking that what you said there would help her as well.
Yes. And I think, what I find is when people have an awareness, just some awareness of how the brain works, it demystifies it. So if I can't stop worrying, okay, how do I begin breaking this cycle? And there's some really kind of certain techniques that we use. One I call, is like the worry tax. And if people do this, it works. It's just hard to get people to encourage them to do this. And the worry tax is, you can worry all you want, but do it, let's say, sitting on a hardwood floor with one arm up and one leg kind of up. Worry your heart away. And what happens is your brain goes, ugh, this doesn't feel so good. Maybe I don't really want to worry as much as, I think I do. And then it's begin differentiating between what's worry and what's problem solving. What's, if you're concerned and you're doing problem solving, that's one thing. But when it flips over into worry, it's just destructive for us. It's not problem
Yeah.
solving. And
I
it
really
just
like that.
anxious us.
And then you've got that, so mindfulness and meditation can help
Yes.
too. How is that?
Yeah. Well, mindfulness meditation is a way of learning kind of mind control, because really that's what it teaches us. It teaches us how to be present and how to recognize that just because we think something or just because we feel something doesn't mean it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And so it helps us be in the present and be able to focus on how can I not necessarily detach from what I'm thinking, but just I don't need to join that parade in my mind.
Yeah.
And when I realize I'm doing it, it's like, okay, how do I shift out of it? And
Right.
beginning that process and accepting that your brain wants you to worry because it thinks it's doing you a favor by keeping you safe by whatever the smart brain is worrying about. And what we find is people that practice mindfulness meditation, there's some studies that have been done out of Massachusetts General and Harvard, some joint research where they found that people who do this for 12 weeks, there's actually changes noted in their brain on PET scans.
Mm.
Now, it's important to practice techniques before you need them, because if you wait until you need them, you're likely to, it's not going to work, because that brain will fight you, because it's going to say, you want to relax when you're worried about being up in the air in a plane? You have got to be kidding me. So the more the more you practice these when you don't need them, the easier they are to use when you need them. And some people can describe beautifully what to do, but they don't practice. And then I say, well, that's like learning how to swim by reading a book. You may be able to describe everything perfectly, but does it mean if you ended up in the deep end of the pool, you'd be able to get to the edge? No, you'd panic. Now, let's say you ended up in the deep end of the pool after reading that book, but also practicing. You may still panic, but then all of a sudden you'll go, oh, I know how to swim. And you get to the side.
Yeah.
It's hard work. It sounds simple on paper, but it takes practice and work.
Yeah,
but
it
it
does.
works.
It's
Yeah.
like strengthening the muscles in your mind, in your brain, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I had a past guest who talked about how our brain just thinks of these things and we just like rubber stamp it and say, well, that must be true.
Yes. Yes.
Mindfulness teaches you to say, wait a second, that's a lie.
Right. Yeah.
That's not true.
Yes, but we tend to believe what we think and feel. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a 5 or 6-year-old child who thinks there's a monster under their bed. They're really scared. Their feelings are real. They are feeling fear, but their thoughts aren't telling them the truth, because there is no monster under the bed. As adults, though, we also have monsters under the bed. It's just to recognize them.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, too, when we sometimes point to outside circumstances as causing these issues in our lives, I've said this before on the podcast. One of my coaches said, when you point a finger at somebody or a situation or a circumstance, you got 3 pointing back at you. So let's look at ourselves. Like, what is it in me that, my thoughts and that are contributing to my feelings, and then my action or my inaction that's leading to these results? It's easier to point at something outside of us than it is to look at us.
Absolutely. And the other is, when we look outside of ourselves, we blame others, or we're angry at others, we actually become victims. I mean, anger is a victim's emotion. Even though it's an energizing emotion and a directable emotion, we start believing something has to change that's outside of our control. So the importance is, when you feel that anger, it's beginning to look at what is the emotion one fueling that anger, and where is that coming from?
Well, most people can't name their emotions. I know when I retired, one of the reasons is I knew I wasn't feeling my emotions. I couldn't name them, happy and sad. And I think there's a book called Permission to Feel, or helping us, even name our emotions. And I started going to a meeting with coaches and counselors and stuff, and they'd be like, well, what do you feel about that? I'm like, I don't know. I know what I think.
Right.
I don't know what I feel. Where do I feel it in my body? Why does that
Yeah.
matter? But it's so important. Can you explain, like, why is it important to know what you're feeling and then where you're feeling it in your body?
Well, our thoughts always don't tell us the truth. So we can have a perception or put a story around something, but it doesn't mean that that is necessarily the truth. And we know our body holds memories. We know that, I mean, an extreme example or more classic example is people who have been abused physically, sexually, they can be very intolerant of touch because their body holds the memories of what had happened to them in the past, even if they don't remember. So even you think of this little toddler that both of his parents died, even, he was under his father. There may be that pressure on his body, maybe a trigger as he goes into adulthood, and he might not know why. So part of it is to listen to what your body is telling you. Where do you feel tension? Where do you feel discomfort? And listen, and even asking, what does that part of the body need? What is it reacting to? What does it need? So that you can appropriately address it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you're watching this and you have some questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So I read this book recently called Living Untethered
Okay.
by Michael Singer or whatever, but he was talking about the importance of how thoughts of, I guess, feelings can, if we don't feel them, if we just ignore it, they can kind of get stuck in our body as stuck energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're talking about with the fear when you feel
Yes.
stuck, right? And then it
Yes.
can start creating dis-ease in our body, right?
Right.
So it's important
Right.
to
Right.
name the feelings, feel them, but not be like, let them control your life or be overtaken
Right.
by them.
Right. It's also remembering it's just a feeling.
Yeah.
You want to acknowledge it, you don't want to ignore it, but it's also just a feeling. And if we can acknowledge our feelings, they don't hurt us. We can survive what we feel. Most people are afraid of uncomfortable emotions. They want to, that flight, fight, or freeze response. They want to get away or fight it. But most of us, when we recognize it's just a feeling, I can deal with this, whether the feeling is anxiety, fear of, I'm afraid of the dark or whatever, we can survive it. And, again, our bodies hold those things. We know that, we're seeing, so many people have autoimmune disorders. And that, I just kind of how, as they get older, how just that stress seems to wear on them. We may not be able to make a direct link yet, but we see correlations.
Yeah. Yeah. There was
Yeah.
something I was thinking when you were saying that, and now it skipped my mind. But so, okay, the trigger warnings. How do you had said, I read on your website that one of your trigger warnings was the smell of your former husband's cologne when you were going through the divorce, right?
Yes. Yes.
Was somebody else wearing it and you smelled it or something and you noticed?
Yes. 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 What happened was, I had a couple of different triggers, and one of them was simply just smelling his cologne. And what that did was that just a rush of emotions came forth. Sense of sad, things that I had not worked through, a sense of sadness, a sense of grief, a sense of loss, a sense of, can I survive this? Can I get through this? Again, it kind of put me back to being 5, and I felt lost. And so I
Yeah.
had to recognize, what are the things in my life that trigger me?
Yeah.
And we know that smell is one of the strongest triggers. And that's why oftentimes when people say you're selling a house, make sure, you have scent of fresh baked cookies or something along that line, because
Yeah.
smells have meaning to us.
Yep. They do. And so
Yeah.
I stayed really busy to not feel my feelings, but I didn't realize that's what I was doing. So sometimes you can do things like unconsciously to, when you get a trigger, to not even notice it, right? Like,
Right. Oh,
it could,
yes.
this could be like scrolling through social media every night instead of really like dealing with what you're feeling, or binge watching on Netflix. Or for me, it was just staying busy. I didn't have time to feel. That was
Right. Right. It's avoid that's, that's kind of classic avoidance. That's, would be almost fleeing from your feelings. So, some of what we do in that case is that's why mindfulness meditation is important, because it allows you just to be mindful of what you feel and learn not to be afraid of it.
Yes.
May not feel good and you may not like it, but learning not to be afraid of it. And that's when the strength starts emerging, when you realize, okay, it doesn't mean I like it, but I can deal with it.
Right.
And I'll give you another example. I've had cancer twice.
Oh, wow.
My prognosis is good. It was 2 different kinds of breast cancer. I blame it on swimming in Lake Erie as a child. But, my prognosis is good. And I remember when I was first diagnosed with the first one, I said, why me? And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, well, why not me? I'm not special. I'm not unique. Cancer happens to, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And when I made that shift, my emotions changed along with that, because I no longer felt like a victim.
Yeah.
I felt like picked on.
It's like, okay, you're thinking,
Yeah.
like, why me? Da, da, da. You stop and think, what's
Well,
another way of
why
looking
not
at
me?
this?
Yeah. Why not me?
Get
And
curious.
that was empowering.
Yeah.
It was empowering.
Yeah. Someone posted the name of that book, and I'm not sure who this is. It says LinkedIn user, so I can't tell who it is, but the name of the book that dealt with feelings is Permission to Feel. And I don't remember the author, but I have it here somewhere. And if you want to message me, I can look it up for you, but it's Permission to Feel. And I know Oprah Winfrey interviewed the person who wrote it. I actually have a piece of paper that has like a feelings, and it's got a list of all these different feelings. So sometimes, I'll look at it like, what am I feeling? Oh, that's a feeling? I didn't realize that was a name of a feeling.
Yeah.
So that's a way of learning.
Yeah.
Because, so when you raise it, I've noticed that my son and his wife, really talk to their 5-year-old about help him name his feelings. Like, what is it that you're feeling? You feel sad, or, whatever.
Right.
They use
Right.
different words. So to help little kids recognize what they're feeling too, and learn how to deal with it.
Oh, I think absolutely. Do you remember the old poster that had different facial expressions on it and feelings underneath?
Yeah.
We use that. Adults can
As
use
adults.
that and
Yeah.
say, which one kind of fits me?
Right.
And, what is this feeling?
And where is it coming from? And how can I not avoid it? How can I feel it, but then let it go? Let that
Yes.
energy leave my body.
Right.
You learned lessons from the Dalai Lama, and you also learned some Eastern and Western medicine. That's what some of the learnings that you incorporated into your book, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. When I was on this journey, I did, and anybody could have done this. So I wasn't special. So I want to make that clear. I spent 4.5 days with teachings with the Dalai Lama and kind of explored, that philosophy and, the concept of detaching, or recognizing that if we are going to attach, we risk having pain, but is it worth it?
Detaching from
Others, detaching from things I pride myself on, or ego may be involved. Like, I like my garden, how do I begin recognizing that if I take pride in something, or I become attached to something, that when there's a change, I may experience grief and sadness, because that's kind of the price that I pay. And I'm really simplifying it here, but that's how I view it. So I make a conscious choice if I want to invest in something and fully invest with my emotions. There's no guarantee this will last forever.
like your dogs.
Absolutely.
I see them on your Facebook page. Mine's over here, Pearl.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I have one that has cancer now. And, it's that decision-making process. He's very old, but the part of me wants to say, I want to do whatever I can to kind of keep him alive. But that's about me.
Right.
Really, I think more than it is about him.
Well, they teach us that a lot in coaching. It's like, in coaching, you're looking for, you would like to help people. That's why you're a coach, right? You want to find a client. So someone says that they're interested, you get on a discovery call with them, and they don't sign up for your coaching.
Right.
So do you get really upset about that? Do you let it like ruin your day? Or like you're trying to convince your boss of something. You're attached to this one outcome. It has to happen this way. And then it doesn't.
Right.
Can you deal with the feeling, but then let it go?
Yes. And that's, I think that's where mindfulness meditation can be incredibly useful. And there is a chapter in my book about, how do you not take things personally? And if you don't do these things like investment in a project or something else, think about what you're going to miss. I don't want to give up something that I may enjoy doing because I may fail at it.
Yeah.
I'll give you, this is kind of a corny example. When I was in third grade, my teacher held up two pictures that we had to color. One was how you do it and one was how you didn't do it. I thought I did pretty good. Mine was how you don't do it. And so that really turned me off from
That
art.
was your picture she held up?
Yes. But she didn't say the name, but that was my picture she held up. Well, I was crushed. I was just absolutely crushed. And I just thought, I avoided art. As I went through this process with this model I developed, I ended up starting pottery. Am I a great potter? Heck no. But do I love it and enjoy it? Yes.
I do too.
Yeah, I would have never done that if I hadn't kind of said, okay, I have to face what I fear, face that I'm just like a mediocre potter.
Yeah.
But boy, it's fun. And
I love it.
That's okay.
I take it with my mom and we go on the wheel, but this is where my mom's like inner critic comes up. And it's I see it a lot more in pottery. It's like, do you think we'll ever make one as good as that? And then I asked the person, how many mugs have you made? 1,000. Well,
yes.
Okay. If we make 1,000, we probably will. And so I can some of the things she says out loud just makes me think, oh man, what's going on in her head? And she had a dad who would pick on her, like, your nose is so big and just things like that. So she grew up with this really strong inner critic, and it's so awesome. What she does now, she bought a kiln because we couldn't take classes during COVID, and she put it in her basement and she hand builds now. And I post some of her things on Facebook, and everyone wants to buy her stuff. And she's like, well, there's a problem with that one, a problem with that one. So the rare time when something comes out of the kiln and she says, I love it, I'm like, yes.
And even if they all were, nobody wanted to buy it, just the process of doing it.
Oh, she's really loving it now. And I think she's really starting to see she's good at it.
Good.
So she's got her own unique style. So it's awesome to see her having worked through that too. But pottery is just so fun.
Yeah, it is. And pottery is an example. I don't know how many people out there have done pottery or some kind of art where you just get into it and you go into the zone. That's mindfulness.
That's mindfulness.
Mindfulness doesn't mean you have to sit cross-legged on the floor and go. There's multiple things that you can, do. It's just focusing on the present. Yep. Allowing just to experience.
Yep. I wrote a blog about pottery because it was like, probably people know this, but it was just like, oh my gosh, I can see this now. It's like pottery's like life. And because in order to have a bowl or a mug with the even around, you have to have it centered. The clay has to be centered at the beginning. You can't rush through it. And so when the clay's uncentered, the bowl's going to be uncentered, or whatever it is you're making is going to be uneven and wobbly. And it's like when we're not centered, then we're kind of uneven and wobbly.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great example.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pottery's a lot like life.
Yes.
So if somebody wanted to work with you, how do they reach out to you?
They would contact me through my website, nancystella.com. That will actually lead to someone else who then forwards me the messages. That's usually the easiest way to reach me. One of the things that's tricky as a psychologist is we can't practice across state lines unless we're licensed in a different state. So I do limit, I will do some coaching, across state lines, but not necessarily from a psychological role.
Okay. So do you have space to take on clients and stuff?
Not right now, I don't. But if someone is interested, right now I'm scheduling about 6 months out.
Wow. That's awesome for you.
Yeah, it is.
Well,
It
it's
is
good and bad because I mean, it's like nothing's ever good or bad, but it's like, wow, a lot of people need help.
That's the hard part about it. And I do, I self-care is important to me. I know if I take on someone and I don't have room for them, I am not going to be able to either get them in regularly or be fully. It's very important work I do to be fully present.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a coach, and
Yes.
one of the areas I coach in, we haven't talked about it yet is at all, and we're going to wrap up, but is positive intelligence, which is all about strengthening your mental fitness, which is all about creating new neural pathways in your mind.
Yes.
And the
Absolutely.
mindfulness and doing it throughout the day and the importance of practicing it. So if somebody wants to learn more about that program, you can go to my website, because that is something that I coach on. And I just started supporting that Positive Intelligence, the company, as the U.S. government accounts director, meaning I'm responsible for helping find clients in state, federal, and local government that could use this positive benefit from strengthening their mental fitness. And
Yes.
just imagine if we all had strengthened mental fitness, understood this about ourselves, were more mindful. I think it would stop a lot of the violence and a lot of the hate and the arguing and everything that's going on in this country. I think if we all just kind of looked at ourselves and worked on ourselves and strengthened our mental fitness, strengthened our brains, and created new neural pathways, it would be awesome.
Oh, it would be. It would be. Good for you. I hope that is successful.
Thanks. Yeah, me too. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a career in the federal government. A lot of people want me to help them sell their stuff, and I haven't done it, but I really believe in this positive intelligence. It aligns with where I like to coach, and I really do think that there's so many people stressed out. So, you're full with clients, other coaches are full. There's plenty to go around, and there's plenty of positive intelligence / mental fitness coaches like me if you don't want to work with me, but it's definitely worth it to take a look at ourselves. We all have areas where we can work. I mean, I've got a coach and a counselor. You work with another therapist, right? So we all have areas. If you're sitting there saying, "Well, I'm good. I don't need to work on anything," I would say look again, probably.
Yeah. Yes. We are an evolving. We're never completely there.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's just part of what makes us human.
Right.
Which is good.
So thank you for this comment, says Nancy and Emily. Thank you for this very insightful evening, which is exactly what I needed at this moment in my life. I'm looking forward to sharing this with others. I appreciate the time you both took tonight to share your stories and wisdom.
Oh,
well, thank you. When I log on to LinkedIn, I'll see who wrote that because I can't really tell right now. But so thank you all for watching. Thank you, Nancy, for being my guest tonight. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Emily.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Guess what? I'm going live again tomorrow night. I guess my hyperachiever saboteur got in my brain and said, Emily, do one more live. Well, I'm excited about it. Aisha Crumbine is a friend of mine. We went through coaching school together. She is just awesome. So I hope you can join me tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern when I interview Aisha. All right. Talk to you guys later. Have a great week. Onward Live is sponsored by Emily Harmon Coaching and Consulting. Visit my website, emilyharmon.com, to learn more about me and my coaching programs. I'd love to help you create a life you love living. Remember, every adversity is our own personal university. Sometimes the lessons are difficult, and we must learn from our experiences. Vulnerability is your superpower. You are lovable and worthy. And we discuss these topics and more because professional is personal. Thank you for joining us and engaging with